Greetings, travelers, and welcome to Traveler RPG Headquarters. You can find our Facebook group by searching our name in the Facebook search tool or find a link in the video description below. Thanks for participating in our second annual Mayday Traveler Day event. It's a day we celebrate Traveler and all of its offshoots for all the fun times it's given us. I'm your host, Frank Succardi, also known as CyborgPrime, and today I'm happy to introduce Mr. Mike Leonard of Cheapo Products. Welcome, Mike.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So, Mike, tell us about yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background. How old are you? How long have you been gaming?
I will be 47 on Thursday.
Oh, happy birthday.
I've been gaming since 1989. That's when I first discovered role-playing games.
Where are you from? Where'd you grow up?
Well, till I was 7, I lived out in rural Missouri near St. Louis, a town called Augusta. It's a little wine country town. And then at 7, after having 2 houses burned down within 3 months, we moved to Kansas City, where both my parents were from. I lived there until I was 17, and my dad's business got bought by the Steelville Telephone Exchange. Steelville, Missouri is south central rural Missouri, and I've lived in that area pretty much most of the time since.
So, tell us a little bit about your childhood background in the terms of like traveler. What would you say your background skills are? Like 2 or 3 background skills that you acquired as a child before you became an adult.
All right. Well, I did not know actually until I was 27 that I have Asperger's syndrome, but and especially in the 80s, growing up, you were just that weird kid. Having a tendency to say what's on my mind and am passionate about where other people couldn't care less and not notice that they couldn't care less made me kind of a social pariah. But from that, I learned to start observing other people. And really, it was role-playing games that really made me focus on studying normal human behavior so that I could then mimic it well enough to fit in and stop being treated like a weirdo. So I'd say that early on, I developed a knack for anthropology, and acting goes pretty good too. Generally, I have a flat line of emotion, but I'm pretty good at seeming like I'm having all the range of experience of emotions with people.
That's interesting.
Now, along with that, of course, I started drawing when I was 7 and loved drawing, although I found out in high school you get a lot more trouble for doodling in class than you do for writing in class. So I kind of switched gears and my drawing kind of fell apart. And I was very happy around 99 to get my first Mac computer and have Poser on it and start to use digital art as a way to get that art back out of me.
Oh, that's cool. So do you have formal training in art? Did you go to college or for that?
Well, unfortunately, as I explained, autism was not a really known quantity in society in the time I was in school.
Okay.
So even though I tested very high and ended up in the gifted program in junior high, I went through some emotional changes that caused me to get some bad grades for 1 year, and they put me in remedial classes the rest of school. I ended up dropping out my senior year and getting my GED. I actually missed 20 of 300 questions and took it in 2 hours, even though it's a 6-hour test. But never went to any schooling after that. I pretty much am self-taught on almost everything.
It's interesting. A lot of people have similar backgrounds in this gaming group. It's interesting.
Yeah, I find that the School of Hard Knocks generally makes a better teacher for adaptability. You learn to be a survivor, and that makes you more likely to overcome hurdles that pop up naturally in any situation.
That's good insight. I agree. So do you have, tell us about things that you like. Is there a favorite book or TV show or like sci-fi intellectual property or whatever you want to call it that's appeals to you or inspires you?
Well, I can tell you that the first adult novel that I read was The Cat Who Walks Through Walls by Robert Heinlein.
Okay.
It's about a guy who is, he's a science fiction writer who lives on the moon and has one prosthetic leg, and he meets a woman that is just he's totally enamored of her, and it turns out she's part of this spy organization. And the essence of the story was that anything that can happen does happen, and he ends up meeting the characters that he thought he had created, and they said, well, yeah, he's the creator. It just every reality exists all at once. The cat can walk through walls because nobody has explained to the cat that that's not a possible thing, so it does.
I see.
That really opened my mind to different levels of science fiction, and I mean, my dad was collecting those books and reading them for years before I started, and I went through every book in the school library by the time I was in the fourth grade. That's why I started at 10 years old reading his collection. After that, I read the Mission Earth Decalogy by Heinlein, and even though I don't care for his personal politics or other ideas that he had, it gave me kind of a sardonic humor. When I look at science fiction, I always come at it from a side angle. As far as current inspiration goes, I look for it everywhere. I find that I've seen enough TV shows and movies of all types that I can translate any situation that I see from one show or another into what I would want to run in my game or experience in my game. Right now, I'm disappointed that Picard only had 10 episodes, and I'm looking forward to the next season of Discovery.
I I'm also powering through the CBS Access, and I love the first. I've been binging on Discovery. I'm saving Picard for when I'm done with Discovery. Hope it's going to be good. I really like the first season of Discovery, and I'm enjoying the second.
Yeah, I've always been one who doesn't let the previous perception of something bias me against current changes.
Mm-hmm.
I like it. I like it no matter what it is. It's Star Trek. It's Star Trek. That said, I recognize a lot of people have preconceived notions that are not being met by a show when it comes along, and so they learn to hate it. Not me. I've loved every Star Trek that's come out. My wife, when she and I started dating, was about the same time that Star Trek Voyager started, and so that's a series that we watched together religiously. And having 7 of 9 from Voyager be on Picard, it surprised me how much it hit me. But 7 of 9 was essentially a parallel to my own evolution socially, because she's a person who has no social skills because she's been a Borg since she was a kid.
Right.
And then her whole arc through Voyager was her trying to learn how to get along with people. So I related to that and didn't realize I hadn't seen her character in 20 years, and seeing her come back after 20 years, it was overwhelming for a little bit. But I absolutely love what Picard has done.
Fantastic. I'm really looking forward to it. So, do you have any hobbies aside from gaming that you enjoy? Do you enjoy sports or photography or, I don't know, drones?
Sports is what those guys that beat up on me did when they weren't beating up on me.
I hear you.
So I never really had much use for them. In fact, nobody in my family really had any interest, so I didn't really get any exposure. In fact, the first time I picked up a baseball bat was in gym class in my freshman year of high school, and when I managed to hit the ball, I didn't know which way to run. So,
awkward.
Yeah. That said, my wife has always been a sports fan. She participated in a few different sports in school, and she has got all 3 of our kids in sports. My son is coming into his freshman year, and he's already going to be on the junior varsity football team, assuming there is one at this point. My daughter Charlie is graduating right now, and she has been offered several scholarships for track and field. She does high jump and pole vault. My daughter Maggie's a little bit more like me. She does participate, but she hasn't really attached herself to anything. So sports, not in particular. Like I say, I like to make the art. I love movies. I constantly watch movies. I've got a huge DVD collection. I've subscribed to several different streaming services now, and I'm always finding disappointment in everybody else's lack of enthusiasm when there's films. I am proud that both of my daughters are, for the second time this year, watching all of the Marvel movies in sequence.
You sound very proud of your kids. That's awesome.
Yeah. I see them, thanks to their mother, as an improvement on all of the things that I wish I had done better. So it's nice to be able to get that going on in life.
That's a really sweet outlook. Um, so tell me, what got you into gaming? What was the first RPG game you played?
Well, it was comic books first. I was collecting the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles black and white comic before the cartoon from RG and their color version destroyed it somewhat. That's one of the few places where that fanboy nerd bias still rears its head in my life.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm standing in line at Quint's Books and Comics at Metcalf South in Overland Park, Kansas, and there's some nerds having some annoying debate like there always are. And I notice in a dark corner where the lights aren't working, a book cover that looked like Kevin Eastman art. And I was like, it was his art really that drew me to the comics in the first place. So I got out of line and went over there, and it was a copy of Mutants Down Under, which was the Australia supplement for the After the Bomb series that followed the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles role-playing game by Palladium Books. So I picked it up not knowing what a role-playing game was. I just loved the art. I read through it, realized it was part of another game, and then I started collecting all of Palladium's games. It was about 3 months later, I made my first friend in that neighborhood because we had just moved there in the middle of my 8th grade. And it was because he had a copy of Ninjas and Super Spies on the lunch table at lunch. And so I started talking to him over Ninjas and Super Spies. And a couple months after that, I ran my first game of Palladium Fantasy, which the original mechanics were very similar to Advanced Dungeons and Dragons with a percentile-based skills system built in. And that's pretty much what I've run ever since. It was the mid 90s when I was first exposed to Star Wars D6. And the friends that I met when I started gaming that occasionally, I've run games with them for over 20 years. But my first exposure to Traveler was actually when I picked up a copy of GURPS Traveler Modular Cutter. I was running a Palladium Aliens Unlimited game and wanted to make deck plans for the ships I was designing, and I saw the deck plans in that book and thought, this is pretty cool. I could make a version of this. And I did, and collected a bunch of GURPS books, which nobody else would play with me. And then didn't really see Traveler again until about 4 years ago. And I was like, this is what I've been missing.
So what was it that drew you to the hobby? What hooked you to RPGs in general?
Well, my childhood goal was actually to be in comic books, and that is visual storytelling. The art led towards it, but writing stories became much more of a passion for me. And of course, like I said, I read books religiously for a very long time, and delving into other people's stories. Between movies, TV, and the books, there isn't a story to be told that I don't think has already been told, but you can always put your own twist on it. And role-playing games give you the opportunity to do that live with the participation of several other people. It's a wonderful escape that also allows us to prepare ourselves for situations that may or may not come to us later in life. I find that, in fact, in my day job managing a home for people with mental disabilities, it is good therapy. I actually get paid to run role-playing games at work. And while I'm there, I've got a guy who is one of the nicest people you'll ever meet, and I'm just exposed him to it. We've had 4 sessions now, him and one of my staff, and he seems like he's not paying attention, and then he'll say something, what if this happens? How do we do that? And it's just like the most insightful thing. He's actually one of the best gamers I've ever had in all the years that I've been gaming. And I'm learning from him as much as he's learning from me. But I'm throwing situations in front of him that have been issues for him in the past, and he's getting the opportunity to have that safe space of a role-playing game to contemplate what he might rather do than have just an immediate reaction. I feel like that's something that most people at some point in their life definitely could use. The tool that a role-playing game can be, and they don't even realize that's what they're doing because they're so fun.
That's an interesting observation. what types of skills do you think or do you observe that people are learning through a role playing game like empathy and problem solving skills, for instance?
Yeah, absolutely. The ability to logic out a situation is something that we all have innate, and I feel like the way we built our civilization, we kind of bury that. We don't teach it in school. Cognitive thought is totally ignored for rote memorization, and that kind of damages our ability to deal with change. But with a role-playing game, you redevelop that ability to rationalize and figure out the best solution. And often, with the help of other people, it allows you to think outside the box enough that you develop the ability to do it without even realizing you're doing it in situations in life. I think most people who are role players, once they get over the hump of social awkwardness, get better at dealing with situations in life than the people around them who haven't done role playing.
Also, an interesting observation. So it sounds to me, I was going to ask you next if you prefer to be a GM or a player, but it sounds like you lead a lot of gaming activities, so I'm going to guess GM.
Well, honestly, uh, I can't say which I'd prefer because I've rarely ever got to be a player. When I do get to play, I very much enjoy it, but I don't have enough experience with it to compare. I have been game mastering since '89, and it seems to be easier for me to find situations where I can get people to let me run a game for them than it is for me to find a situation where somebody has a game I can get into. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, I've played in 2 games online in the last year, and one of them has fallen apart because everybody's waiting for me to tell them a cool story with my character, whereas I'm waiting for them to put their part in. I feel like I'm just carrying it. And then in the other one, everybody else already had their story going on, and my input seems to be irrelevant. So I just have kind of fallen out of it too.
Oh, that's
But
too bad.
yeah, I would love to be a gamer. I sort of like that old bridesmaid thing: always the game master, never the
Never the
player.
player.
Hmm.
That's funny. So, so what's your? Let's talk about Traveler for a sec. You said you've been back in it for about 4 years. What's your favorite aspects of about it?
Well, I think that the incredible wealth of source material has always blown my mind. Like comparison to what I've always known, the Palladium Fantasy, the second book, book 2, the old ones, is the maps of the Timuro Kingdom, and there's like 150 maps in there, and I know that Timuro Kingdom like the back of my hand. So if I want to run a fantasy game, I can always just pull that out. And then when I come to Traveler and I find the Traveler map online, the amount of resources that are there instantly for anybody who wants to play this game is just astounding. It's an extraordinary community. Every time you ask a question on one of the groups on Facebook, there's a dozen answers that can give you insights that you never would have imagined. I didn't know that there was such an awesome community. I knew gamers were awesome, but to have that many that can have a good conversation and inspire you every time you look, that's that's definitely something I'm glad to be a part of.
Traveler has a lot of licensed product, but man, there is so much like stuff put out, like fan based stuff. It's mind boggling.
Yeah,
The fans
yeah,
are really
I
passionate about the game, and people make all kinds of things, maps and ships and scenarios, and they just put them out there. And there's so much you could really get into it without ever having to buy anything, really.
yes, and from what I've seen, the quality of the fan material is much higher than the quality of fan material I've seen with other systems. I think that that has something in part to do with the simplicity of the rules as they started and as they've continued through the multiple iterations. Uh, it is an easy system to get a grasp on, both the setting and the rules for each of the ones that I've seen. I mean, GURPS is kind of a complicated rule set to begin with, but the original Classic Traveler, I'm putting together a game for my group here with Mongoose 2E as soon as I can get them past their Palladium Fantasy setting that we're doing. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what they do with that.
That's cool.
And not just because that's what most of my products and contributions have been for.
Well, I was going to ask you next. Do you have a favorite setting for Traveler, or do you like to make your own, or a hybrid of both?
Uh, so far, I feel like traders are the way to go. I've actually, the game I played online was in the from the box set of the Great Rift, and the areas around that I find fascinating. It's difficult to nail down a particular spot, but I think if I sat down for half an hour reading the description of any one of the settings, any one of the planets, or any one of those systems that has some good material, I would run with it. I'm not really biased one way or the other, but I've enjoyed what I've played so far, and I think I will probably run in the Great Rift simply because that was the first set that I bought.
For nostalgia's sake, or because you just know it the best?
I think I know it the best, and it's literally the only physical books I have besides this one GURPS book.
So, let's talk about being a content creator. When did you become a sci-fi content creator for sci-fi games?
Well, I actually, my very first published work was in 1996, and I did the Game Master screens for the Rifts role-playing game. I also did the character sheets for that game and for the Palladium Fantasy game. And then I spent 10 years not doing anything but running games at home, and started doing artwork for Palladium's Rifter series of user contribution books. And I realized that most of my free time while I was watching TV, I was making characters in Dad's studio that would be good for using as paper miniatures, something that I've always loved since I was a small kid, not even knowing that they were for role-playing games. And so I started turning them out for Palladium Fantasy, and then I turned out some for Rifts for Palladium books. And after I'd done that for a while, I basically just got paid to do them and watched them hit the market, and had no idea how popular they were or how their sales were going. And I said, I should do this myself. And I did some research and saw that the Traveler's Aid Society had a simple license, and it's science fiction, and I love science fiction. And so I made my first couple of sets for Traveler. And let's see, that was 2018, 2 years ago. And then I started doing my El Cheapo Products sets that basically I've designed with Traveler in mind, but are entirely mine. So I have a little bit higher slice of the profit on those.
Mm-hmm. And I guess more freedom of development in that respect.
Exactly. Yeah. Anything that clearly is proprietary, I still turn out in the Traveler's Aid Society. I did the set of Sodani. I felt was a good set, but then I did a set of yellow goldish skinned space elves for El Cheapo Products, which some people say look a lot like Darians, but I did it as my own set. So
I hear you. Okay, cool. And so did you come up with this yourself and totally produce it by yourself, or did you have a team of people that work with you and maybe give you ideas, or whatever? Do you do the entire production yourself?
Absolutely, every bit of it is by myself. When I did it for Palladium Books, I literally put the whole package together. I talked with the owner and one of the editors, and when he approved the content, I sent it to them, and they uploaded it in their store. I have done pretty much all of it myself for them, and everything else is entirely on me too. In fact, a couple of the sets that I did for Traveler, I turned out 2 of those sets in one weekend while watching TV.
Wow.
I've developed some scripts in Photoshop, so once I've done my renders, which I have a set of camera angles set up in the program, so I make a character, hit camera 1, render, hit camera 2, render, save those files, and I did it for all of the different variations, and then I get it into Photoshop and bring up the 2 front and back images with a mask, and I click a button and it processes them, and I click another button and it makes the mini, and then it's take those mini files and save them as PNGs and stick them all together to build the PDF.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And they're really nice, by the way. they're really colorful and like saturated colors. I mean, they look good.
I appreciate that. One of the things, one of the other artists that works for Palladium, Mike Muma, he explained to me what the uncanny valley is. That's the place that you find clowns and mannequins and very realistic 3D art. And it turns out the uncanny valley is called that because a lot of people are creeped out by those things
Uh-huh.
because it looks real, but they know it's not real, and that flips a disturbing switch for a lot of people. So when I put it into Photoshop, I have some processes I put it through to make it a little more cartoony. It makes the colors a little more vibrant, makes it
Hmm.
look a little more like a drawing and less like a 3D model that's been rendered. And I'm pretty happy with the style I've come up with. I haven't seen very many other people get close to it, and that I think is probably one of my selling points.
It is unique and good looking product. So yeah, thanks for putting that out there. So Mike, I see you have over 60 products listed in your catalog on Drive-Through RPG. Where do you find time and inspiration to be so productive?
Well, as an autistic person, I have discovered that the best label that fits me is a social introvert. I think more like an introvert than most people, but I'm very good at socializing as long as I get downtime. For me, that usually means Saturday or Sunday staying in my office in the basement by myself, not really interacting with anybody. And while I'm doing it, that's when I'm making my art, and I'm also watching TV. I've got an old 32-inch flat screen attached to my computer, and I'll throw up Netflix or Amazon Prime or CBS All Access and watch something while I'm making my art. And I don't know, I have the system down. Um, Autistic people do what's called stimming. It's where you see them where they're tapping their legs, or they're nodding their head. Sometimes the lower functioning will actually hit their head against the wall. That's a ability to force themselves to focus on one thing because we take in so much from everywhere else.
Mm.
So my stimming is the process of making the art and watching shows, usually ones that I've already seen, sometimes not what I've already seen. Doing those together allows me to focus on less things. And that's where my speed comes in. I'm doing it, and part of it's subconscious.
Using this technique, how long would you say it would take you to get into flow, into like workflow?
Um, if I'm not getting interrupted and I'm inspired when I start, uh, like I said, I'll get up and probably by 8 o'clock in the morning start the set that I have planned, and I will create 8 figures for female and for male. I'll do 3 different variations on the colors and outfits of each of those, and get them all rendered, and then process them within 9 hours of when I started.
So you try to do them all in one sitting, or do you have to sometimes find yourself breaking it up over several days for the projects?
I usually, once I get started, will try to do one sitting. Sometimes I'll get interruptions, and it may take me 2 days or 3 days to get it done. But that's because, and in those times when I'm not working on it, I'm really struggling to not be working on it. I can't focus on anything else. It becomes a railroad pinpoint focus. This is what I should be doing, not this other stuff you're paying me to do. So
Right. That's funny. So the uh what's your I also saw in your product catalog that you have a lot of minis, but you also have some like ship deck plans. What's your favorite type of content to produce? Do you like to do maps, or do you like to do minis, or both, or figures, or
honestly, I would love to do more maps and ship designs. It's just they're much heavier. They're more work intensive. It takes a lot more time to do those. Like I said, with the minis, I can turn a set out when I'm inspired in a day. The deck plans, I'm looking at a week of free time doing that on top of my job. Um, it is more rewarding to me because as an autistic person, my imagination, I have discovered, is probably a little more vivid than most people. So when I'm designing a spaceship, I'm seeing it from the inside, and I'm just using the tools I've got to try and translate that for other people. And I would rather be on a spaceship than driving around in a car on the freeway and dealing with other human beings here that have meaningless lives doing stupid things. So
I hear you.
It's a great escape to be building a spaceship that I'd rather be on.
Right. So, tell us what you've been up to this past year. Do you, let's take a step back. Do you have any like local game stores that you'd like to patronize, or where you live?
Sadly, I don't. The town I live in, Cuba, Missouri, has a population around 3,200, and someone did open a comic book store last year, and he seems to be doing okay, but he's more focused on the comics than anything else, and there's not really much space for gaming. I work 20 miles to the west in Rolla, Missouri, which is a college town. MST used to be UMR, which is in the top 20 engineering schools in the world, and they have Eclipse Books and Comics, which has a massive gaming area, which is usually overrun with Warhammer players and people who play Pathfinder. So I haven't had the opportunity to game there for several years. I would like to be able to get a group together with it, but everybody seems focused on the games they're already playing, and I just don't have the extra time outside of trying to produce product for El Cheapo Products, doing my freelance work for Palladium and for Mongoose, and the occasional commission from other people that have wanted me to do art. I just don't have the time to get together a group in person to do it.
I hear you. You mentioned earlier that you do have a personal gaming group. You're just waiting for them to finish up on this other adventure. They're in another system, the Palladium Fantasy, right?
Yes, I actually got tired of not being able to game, and so I got it approved at work to have one of my staff and one of our consumers that lives in the house get to start playing. So 1 or 2 days a week at the end of my 8-hour shift, I'll stick around and run a game for as long as the consumer will go, which is in 2 to 3 hours each time.
That's great.
Like, but both of them are completely new to desktop tabletop role-playing games. My staff, he has been playing Skyrim like I do when I'm not producing. It's my zone out thing is to play Skyrim on my Xbox. And so we talked about that a lot. And I said, look, it's just like Skyrim, only instead of the computer, you're using your imagination, which I guarantee is going to do better than the screen. And he so far has been pretty happy with it.
I was going to ask, how do they enjoy it so far?
Yeah, they're both loving it. If we can just get to the next step every time, it's like, oh, and we get to that point where he's taken in too much information and he needs to go lay down for a while. It's like, oh, but we were just about to do this part.
Well, that's your cliffhanger for next week.
Exactly. We keep having those, and they're enjoying them. We did it simple. The staff is running a wizard, and the consumer is running a paladin, which I helped him generate. So he basically is got a sword and a shield and some spears, and he's just killing things left and right. Sometimes the wizard has to put him to sleep first for him, but overall, he's doing pretty good, and he's enjoying every minute of it.
That's great. I love to see new players coming into the hobby and seeing their faces light up when they first discover the hobby of cooperative storytelling.
Yes,
it's a spot for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
So being an introvert, you probably don't go to many conventions.
Well, it's funny you say that. My first time going to any kind of convention was in 2006. Palladium Books decided to have an open house in their warehouse. And I was like, well, this is my opportunity to actually meet them in person, because I'd only submitted stuff by mail back from 92 to 94. I was talking to them on the phone, trying to get them to look at that submission. And then in 96, they finally bought it. Again, I only ever talked to them on the phone because they're up in a suburb of Detroit. I'm in the middle of Missouri. So when they decided to have that open house, I decided to go. And one of the guys that I had gamed in a play-by-post game with lives in Columbia, Missouri, which is about an hour and a half away. And he sent me a message saying we should go together. And I was like, yeah, that's great. And then as it got closer, my introvert nature started to panic and told me that it was insane to get into a car with a stranger and drive 600 miles to spend 3 days away from my family with more strangers.
Stranger danger.
Exactly. But my wife and my mother both told me that I would regret it for the rest of my life if I didn't go. So I let them be the ones to make the decision, and he brought 2 more strangers I didn't know, and halfway through we switched cars, so I was riding with somebody I'd never talked to before for half that trip. And while we were up there, I did have several moments where I had to go in a dark corner just to gather myself because it was overwhelming to be in that environment. But what I discovered is I am much more comfortable in a convention of gamers than I am anywhere else in the world. And when they have an open house, I go. They did it in 2006, they did it in 2007, and then 2008 they said, sorry, we can't do it this year because we have to move to a new building. And so that year, one of the friends I met at the first one, who's also a freelancer with them, Mark Overly, he and I drove to Detroit to help them move instead of, because there was no gaming convention. Well, we were going anyway. So
That's awesome. That's some hardcore fans right there.
Oh, absolutely. Well, it paid off too. He was offering a 50% discount on books for anybody who helped move. So I was able to complete my collection by going up there and help him do that. But yeah, it became a regular thing for me. And in 2013, I volunteered to help him at Gen Con in Indianapolis. So every year since then, I have gone to Gen Con and worked the booth for Palladium Books. And that's what they average 70,000 attendees. And I could not be more happy than when I'm busting my ass selling stuff at the booth there or running games at that convention.
Wow, that's awesome. I didn't expect that answer.
Yeah, well, and the funny thing is, the first year I went, 2013, Dead Gentleman Productions, Zombie Orpheus Entertainment, they make the Gamers movies. Have you ever seen any of those?
No.
Okay, you can look them up on YouTube. The Gamers, Darkness Rising, the Gamers, The Hands of Fate, and then their most recent one, The Gamers, The Shadow Menace. They also did some films, the Journey Quest series. But the actors and the producers go to Gen Con every year. And that year in 2013, they were actually shooting The Gamers, The Hands of Fate at Gen Con, and somehow I managed to miss it. But that was the same year that I had discovered their Demon Hunters films and was sitting back at the hotel at night with the guy I was rooming with, watching those and dying laughing. So in 2014, I went over and started trying to get pictures with the actors and talking to them. And then I started back in their projects when they have them on Kickstarter. And last year, they do a Gamers Live event, which is sort of like Whose Line Is It Anyway, but it's their characters from the Gamers movies, and they sit at a table as if they're gaming, and they take suggestions from people in the audience, and then when they ring the bell, they have to get up and play their actual characters that their players were playing, and people who are in the audience have paid extra, they can go up and be the non-player characters in their little bit. A lot of fun.
That sounds like fun.
It's absolutely a blast. And the first time I stayed and went to that in 2015, they described a character that they were making for one of the players to have, and it was spontaneous on the spot. It was a fairy, mermaid, half-dragon, barbarian.
Okay.
That sounds insane. I have to make a picture of that. So over the course of the hour and a half that they were doing their show, I sat there with my laptop and I made an image of this, which can be found in my gallery at Madman Mike on DeviantArt. And I showed it to them at the end of the show, and they were just amazed that I'd done it in such a short time. I said, well, my battery was getting low, so I had to hurry. And since then, I go to their Friday night show each time I go to Gen Con, and I make an image of the characters that they do in that. And I've gotten to be good friends with Christian Doyle and Chris Odie, who run the show. And last year, they do a Saturday show, and I was volunteering to help with the crowd. And Christian dragged me up on stage to participate for 2 hours in their show. So I sat there on the stage with Chris and one of the other actors and acted as a judge while we were judging their performance of their characters.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it was kind of a life-changing experience. I discovered that people say the greatest fear in man, even above death, is public speaking. Turns out I don't have a fear of that.
A lot of people are fearful of it. I've had some people turn down some interviews and things because they were just too nervous about speaking in public, even though technically it's just us two on a recording. But I understand people are freaked out about different things.
Yeah, it gets down to that base fear of embarrassment. We're taught from early on that we don't want to do something that will embarrass us or those around us, and it just becomes almost pathological inability to do things that we know are likely to cause us embarrassment.
Hmm.
But me, I'm oblivious to embarrassment.
Let's just get the embarrassment out of the way and do something embarrassing at the beginning. And
Exactly.
So what about production now? What products have you been working on anything this past year? Like major
Well,
projects?
the Danifrid Light Trader is that first deck plan that I've got up there in my store, and that was the final fruition of what I started with in the first place when I first discovered Traveler, making deck plans. It is a passion of mine, and I want to do more of those. Since last summer, when I first got commissioned by Mongoose to do artwork for their Journal of the Traveler's Aid Society, they had me doing ships. I've done artwork for volumes 5 and 6. I think 5 just came to drive through. So I did several of the ships in that. And I'd gotten permission from them to use the journal to use the Traveler's Aid Society to do deck plans in my style of those ships. I just haven't gotten to those yet. It's on my long list of things to do.
That's on your production list for this coming year, hopefully.
Yes, adapting the ships that I designed for them to have my deck plans so people can actually print maps and use my miniatures on them. Because Mongoose does their deck plans in that angular thing. They're for seeing the inside of it, but they're not really useful for miniature use.
Right. So that gets me to what's the biggest benefit of your that players will get from your deck plans, or from your most recent from your deck plans or most recent products?
Yeah, well, visualization is always good, but having an actual physical image in front of you, a map that shows you the distances and a miniature that you can move across there, knowing how far they can move, that gives you spend less creative energy keeping track of the action when you've got visual aids. That's always been my goal with it. And I like them to look good enough that you might want to hang them up on the wall, or just have them as, yep, this is our ship.
Do they include like commentary, or are they put together like a D&D module, as far as like a key to all the rooms and descriptions of all the things you'll find in the ship?
To a degree. I haven't gone into full detail for room by room, but I give kind of a walkthrough, as if you were being given a grand tour of the ships. So there's, and I also try to give a little bit of background in the design. I've created Corvidine Systems as the company that manufactures the ships that I'm putting together. And a little bit of background story happens about Corvidine in them. The launch, for example, that I've done is a separate ship for the Danifrid Trader. It has its own fuel scooping system, so you can hit a system and take a couple of crew, put them on the launch with the fuel skimmer, and send them out to get enough fuel to have a whole jump's worth, a full load of the jump fuel, while the main ship goes and lands on a planet or at the starport, gets a full load there, and that doubles their range. Or you could actually get the launch by itself with that system, with the fuel skimming system, and use it as a side business to refuel other ships. So
that's
in the design of that, I had Corvidine's founder arguing with his marketing department. He doesn't want a ship that's just bare bones. He wants the luxury. Having been a guy who rode around in ships for 20, 30 years, he knows being in a bare bones ship sucks, especially when you're out there on a long haul. And so he wants some luxury built in. But it does include the bare bones version that they asked for, which he reluctantly put together.
That's cool that you're building lore for your around your product, around the ships, and within the context of your imagined world for your universe.
Right. I
awesome.
find a little bit of flavored text goes a long way, and as much as we can get, the more we get, the better.
So, tell us about some of your other popular, like what's the most 2 or 3 most popular titles in your product line?
Well, I find that with my El Cheapo products, the paper miniature that I've done, I try to give a good variety of character miniatures that people can say, that one's my character. I try to do the adventurers, just spacers in general. I've got a set that is your typical belters style, and I try to just make the people that you might run into in that space setting, and it seems that those are the most popular. When I do adventurers, I try to make sure that at least half of them are armed, so that you've got one of somebody carrying a gun. But I like to do a set of people that would be, like I've got a set of spaceport folk, and there's a guy carrying a case of product or whatever, so you can have him as one of the extras in the spaceport that might get shot in the crossfire. I like to build that background as much as possible, because the less you have to think about it, having a visual aid of those other people, you don't have to say, oh yeah, don't forget there's other people here. You can just throw them out on the board and there they are.
Right. That's a good point. So, what are your plans for next year? You're going to try to hit those conventions again, assuming the virus goes away?
Yes. Well, I'm still holding out for Gen Con, although I'm seeing that it's less likely that it's going to happen this year. It's usually the last week of July. I think it's supposed to be beginning of August this year. But next year in the spring is the 40th anniversary of Palladium Books, and they're supposed to have an open house. And if travel is allowed, absolutely, I'll be going to that too. But Gen Con is on my radar every year. Continue to go and work.
Awesome. So, what's the if you could get one major project done this next year, what would it be?
I would say I would like to get at least 3 more deck plans, ship designs out. I've got a couple of different ideas for courier ships that could easily be translated to a mercenary ship, and I want to do a bigger bulk hauler, possibly also one that would be a good passenger liner. I think that would be a fun one to have for running adventures. You guys don't have a ship yet, but you're on this liner on your way, and now something's happened, and you got to figure your way through all of the problems that could happen on that. What's that show on? I think it's on HBO.
About a luxury yacht, space yacht.
Yeah, right. It's essentially a luxury liner that has gone off course, and that show is hilarious. I can't wait for the next season to come out. If it does, hopefully it will. But the idea of being stuck on a liner and having to deal with things on there—that's fun. Truthfully, we like to think of the endless possibilities that come from a space setting, but ultimately, everyday problems are still happening. They're just happening on a spaceship or on a space station or on that exotic planet. You can put them anywhere. And if you have a big ship with a lot of people, that gives you the room of a city to run around having your adventure, but still in an enclosed space.
That's a good insight. So where can people find your products? Where's the best place?
Drive-Thru RPG. If you go there and just do a search for Mike Leonard, it'll bring up all of my products, my El Cheapo products, the ones I've done on the journal or on the Traveler's Aid Society, and the ones from Palladium.
Cool. And do you have a personal website or social media people can contact you on?
All you got to do is look me up on DeviantArt.com. I'm Madman Mike there. I got on at the beginning of the site, so I didn't have to add any numbers to it or special symbols or anything.
That's awesome.
And of course, I'm also Mike Leonard on Facebook, and I'm in most of the groups.
I did check out your gallery over there at DeviantArt. It's pretty nice. I think folks should go and check it out.
One of my day jobs was working for FedEx in 2011, and after 276 hours on the clock in 2 weeks and 4 days, I fell asleep at the wheel from exhaustion and ended up breaking my hip and most of my right leg. And that gave me 16 months of recovery time, and that's where most of the spaceships that are in that gallery came from. Me sitting around with my leg up in traction, designing spaceships.
Well, at least you made the best of the situation.
Yeah.
Sorry to hear about that, though.
Oh, well, I'm up to... Last year, before it got cold and I started getting fat again, I could run 5K in 26 minutes, which I'm told is pretty good for a 26-year-old, and I'm 47 almost, so... I've got it back now, but it's just a little bit of rheumatic pain. That's going to happen to all of us at some point, right?
Yeah, yeah, right. All right, man. Well, that's the end of our interview. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk.
Fantastic. I'm your host, Frank Succardi, also known as CyborgPrime, and I've been talking with Mr. Mike Leonard of Cheapo Products. Pick up copies of his products at DriveThruRPG. Mike, thank you so much for participating in our Mayday Mayday Traveler Day event.
It was fun. I look forward to seeing how it came out.
Me too. And thank you, listener, for joining us today. That's all for now, travelers. Until next time, happy traveling.